So I want to talk about my methodology when it comes to choosing the settings so you could concentrate on the expression and the poses. Aperture priority. This is the best thing that will ever happen to you. Aperture priority allows me to choose my aperture setting so I can blur out the background, and then it does the rest of the homework for me. I'm going to show you this perfect setting to use on the camera to override what the camera thinks is the proper exposure and give you whatever you want. Every camera, whether it's your phone, whether it's Canon, Nikon, Sony, has a button called exposure compensation. That's the plus and minus button on your camera. As soon as you hit it, exposure bar is going to show up, and you're able to dial in to automatically force the camera to either overexpose or underexpose. So when I'm out shooting on a street and the camera looks a little bit dark or the exposure looks a little bit bright, I go ahead and adjust that setting, underexpose it or overexpose it, and until the next time I change that setting, the camera will be forced to automatically underexpose exactly how you like it. Now I want to go ahead and talk about a very common question I always get. Why are your original straight out of camera images always underexposed? And the reason for this is because I want to protect my highlights as well as possible. So when I'm sitting there taking my pictures, looking at the screen, I go ahead and just my eye goes straight to the highlights. Could I see detail in the highlights? That is the question. If I can't see those detail in the highlights, then I know it's going to be very hard for me to recover it later on in post-processing. Now here's the key thing to remember. You must shoot in RAW. If you don't shoot in RAW, it's going to be very hard for you to bring out those shadows and details out of those shadows in your RAW files. If you shoot in RAW versus JPEG, you have so much more flexibility when it comes to the file. JPEG is basically what you see is what you get. So if there's no detail in the highlights or the shadows are far too dark, you're not going to really be able to bring those out without creating grain if you're even able to. RAW has tons of other information which we don't see, but when you put it into a program such as Camera Raw or Capture One, you're able to pull out those details and really bring that exposure exactly where you want it. Now, the reason why you want to take an image and you want the details in the highlights and the shadows is because when you look at the skin, you really want to see detail in the skin. You don't just want to see a bright hot spot. It really distracts the viewer's eye from the portrait. You want to have detail both in the shadows and the highlights. Now, the reason why I like underexposing and I want to be able to bring out detail from those highlights is because if you take the exposure properly, where people would be okay with it, and then try to bring in detail on the highlights, it doesn't look natural. What I've come to learn about post-processing RAW files is that the programs out there right now have a much harder time bringing back the details in the highlights than the shadows. But something to keep in mind is that it's very different to not properly light your subjects than underexposing your subjects. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys both examples of both underexposing and not properly lighting. Underexposing a properly lit image is very different than not having good lighting. So I want to go ahead and talk about lighting just a little bit. When it comes to good lighting, you want the light to hit your subject's face evenly on the forehead, the cheeks, the nose, and the chin. Poor lighting would be coming in just from the side, only from behind her, or only from the top. Good lighting is when it's coming from right around her eye level or slightly higher, smack in the front of her face. This is why I love alleys. In alleys, we have directional light coming from right above eye level from both sides. Now I'm going to show you an example of how I'm going to take a shot with good lighting, but it's going to be slightly underexposed, and also a shot where the light is coming in from the wrong direction and her skin is dark and it's not properly lit, and that's something we're going to be able to retouch and create an amazing image with later on in post-processing. As a general rule of thumb, you want your shutter to be faster than your focal length. So if you're shooting with a 50mm lens or 85mm lens, you want to be at least a shutter of 1/85th or 100th or faster. This will make sure that you freeze that motion. Right now, her face is directly facing the end of this narrow alley, and the light is hitting her perfectly in the center of her face. Let's go ahead and take a couple images. We're going to switch the camera back into aperture priority. At 1.8, the camera is going to choose our shutter speed automatically by itself. I'm going to go ahead and underexpose by just 1/3 of a stop and see how it comes out. It's looking good. I'm going to underexpose by another 1/3 of a stop. All right, this is really good. Let me have you just tilt your chin slightly upwards. And then let me help you pose for a shot. You could go ahead and just, there we go. And then you could like either play with your collar or, there we go, that's perfect. And then let me have you tilt your head upwards a little bit. There we go. And turn your face slightly more this way. There we go. Perfect. All right, the light is coming in and hitting her perfectly in the middle of her face. Now I'm going to have her just take a few steps over here. Go ahead and stand over here, Chelsea. And now the light, again, is coming in from this direction and this direction. But right behind us, we have a wall. And this wall is blocking any light from hitting her in the middle of her face. Let me go ahead and show you a few examples of very poor lighting. As you can see, the lighting is absolutely horrendous here. There's so many different highlights and shadows in the wrong places of her face. And this was literally 90 degrees in a different direction from where we were standing before. The lighting is coming from two different sides of the street, and the front of her face is blocked by a building, and there's no lighting hitting her square in the face at all. This is the perfect example of lighting you do not want, and this is not considered a properly lit image and being underexposed.